Good evening, everyone, or depending where you are, actually. Good afternoon or good morning. So we had our obligatory 4 or 5 minute wait for guests still joining, like a good Armenian event should. But I'm very excited. All our events are special, but Books on Display series is super special because it's led by everyone's favorite librarian, Dr. Stepan-Sarkissian. So Book on Display, some of you will know this, is a part of our program funded by National Heritage Lottery. And it was meant to be a physical event. We were actually trying to buy a nice display case to put a book where you can come and see, but now we're all pixelated, living in a digital reality. And Gagik is bringing these books to display on Zoom. Hopefully you can all come and see it in the library one day. So I'm very excited to invite my colleagues Gagik and program manager Nick to lead this very interesting conversation. Just wanted to say, you will all know you are all on mute, but you'll have an opportunity to ask questions and have a chat with Gagik because he knows everything. The event is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen, please turn off your videos. And at the end of the event, please stay because we might bombard you with a few links to our website, to our library fundraiser, and other exciting things. And now I'd like to invite my colleague, Dr. Matteo.
Thank you very much, Tato, and welcome, friends. Barikalust Angerner. So, as Tato said, this event tonight is part of a series of events in a program funded by the National Lottery Heritage Foundation. And this program, this project has 4 different themes, and this falls under 2 in particular, literary heritage and migration, displacement and refugees, but also neighbours past and present. And those last 2 themes obviously speak to the overriding anniversary and commemoration that we have for April, commemorating the Armenian and also the related genocides that took place in the late Ottoman Empire. So this is the first event that we have speaking about those events. And at the end, I'll say what the upcoming events are. But as Tato said, the event tonight is particularly exciting because it means we get to sit back and listen to my dear colleague and all-round polymath, Dr. Gagik Stepan-Sarkissian, my colleague of 4 months who I have not yet met in person, who is the librarian and also the research advisor and head of the language department and East Armenian teacher here at the Armenian Institute. Gagik is also a retired biochemist who has taught and led research groups at Tehran State University and the University of Sheffield before moving to the private sector and working in biotechnology and agribusiness across Europe. Gagik also has to his name that he developed the first Armenian syllabus for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and taught there for over several years. So we really weren't joking when we said all-round polymath. But tonight Gagik will talk to us about a very special publication that we have in our library, talking about Armenian life in Smyrna at the end of the 19th century. So Gagik, please.
First of all, good evening, everyone. And thank you, Datevik and Nick, for this introduction. I'd like to meet that person sometime. I'm going to, first of all, welcome to our 5th virtual Book on Display event, which, as Datevik and Nick mentioned, is in the framework of National Lottery Heritage Grant we received in 2019. And every 3 months, the Armenian Institute will put a book from our library collection on display and discuss its importance. This April, the month in which we commemorate the Armenian genocide, our book on display is a 2-volume work. I'm going to share my screen now and open the PowerPoint. Yes, it's the book on display is this 2-volume work on Armenians in Smyrna, modern-day Izmir in Turkey, written by the Mekhitarist Father Hagop Kosian and published in Vienna in 1899. The Armenian Institute copy has both volumes bound under the same cover. So here you see the title page for volume 1, a title page for volume 2, and also the spine, which is leather bound with Armenian lettering in gold. The book is entitled Հայք Izmyrnիա եւ շրջակայս, հետազոտություն արձանագրությանց եւ հիշատակարանած, which is Armenians in Smyrna and the environs, research of inscriptions and memorials. Altogether, there are about 69 illustrations in the book, which range from monochrome photographs as well as a good number of floor plans of buildings such as churches, schools, and a hospital. The first volume is dedicated to Hovsep Çelebi Yusufian, who is joined by his spouse Fuliane on the frontispiece of the second volume. Çelebi is a Turkish loanword in Armenian, meaning a gentleman or a very well-mannered person. And it was a honorific title quite common amongst Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. Although the author doesn't say so in his book, an article in the Armenian daily newspaper Byzantion, which was published in Constantinople in 1905, says that Hovsep Yusufian actually paid for the publication of both volumes of Kosian's work. I wasn't able to find a lot of biographical detail about the author of this work, but here he is. I managed to find a picture of him. Here he is with his luxurious beard, born in 1865 and died in 1937. In addition to the two volumes on Smyrna Armenians, he also published other descriptive works on cemeteries, Armenian cemeteries in Constantinople, as well as a descriptive work on the city of Erzurum, which was his birthplace, and the Armenian community there. After the armistice of 1918 and the occupation of Constantinople by Allied forces, Kosian returned to Istanbul and interviewed a number of survivors of the Armenian genocide who had managed to reach the Ottoman capital. And he produced this work, Aksorki Champan, The Road to Exile, which also included photographs of the survivors he had interviewed. Later on, he also published a number of catalogues of Armenian manuscripts. Father Kosian worked for many years in Smyrna, first as the pastor of the Mekhitarist church there, and also taught for several years again at the school that the Vienna Mekhitarists had set up in Smyrna. The Mekhitarist order of Armenian Catholic monks was founded in Constantinople in 1701 by Mekhitar of Sebastia, this gentleman here. Sebastia, of course, is the modern-day Sivas in central Turkey. He created the order with the aim of raising the educational and spiritual level of the Armenian people. He felt that the Church of Rome and Western models of scholarship were the best route for him and his disciples to achieve this ambition. After a short spell in Greece, the order settled in Venice in 1717, where the Senate gave the monks this island, the island of San Lazzaro. And after that, the death of Mekhitar in 1749, and following some internal disputes over a revised constitution set up by the successor abbot, a number of monks left the island in 1773, and after initially settling in Trieste, then part of the Austrian Empire, finally moved to Vienna in 1811, where they were given an abandoned monastery where they still, as their mother house, where they still operate. So this is the entrance of the monastery, the huge library they have, and the internal court of the monastery there. Like the parent congregation in Venice, the monks in Vienna continued to publish many classics and original works of scholarship in Armenian, and established schools in the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, and later on in the Middle East. But now let's return to Smyrna. That's where it is, as you all know, on the western coast of Anatolia. It was a Greek city on the Aegean coast, probably founded by some indigenous peoples, but it became a Greek colony after the 8th century BCE. Greek influence remained very strong in the city after the establishment of Ottoman rule in the 15th century. In the 17th century, Smyrna emerged as one of the most important trade centers in the empire. Although Kosian says in his book that the opening of the Suez Canal and expansion of trade with China, Japan, and India adversely affected trade through the port of Smyrna. By the beginning of the 20th century, the city began to look like a metropolis with a cosmopolitan city center and a population consisting of Turks, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews, and a large contingent of resident European merchants. The book on display today is an important work of reference about the Armenian presence in Smyrna, which came to an abrupt end in 1922. The first volume deals with Smyrna, the city and its suburbs of Burnabad, Cordelio, Karataş, and Göztepe. The second volume covers the Armenian presence in smaller towns and villages in the hinterland. Some of these localities are shown on the next map, and with the Armenian population there. I couldn't find all the places that Kosian mentions in his book on a modern map, but these are the most important Armenian settlements in the hinterland of Smyrna. By far the largest population was in this place called Manisa. Now, the book we are displaying today is printed in modern looking, very easy to read Armenian fonts designed for the Vienna Mekhitarists and for which they were quite famous. Actually, for a trained eye, if someone gets hold of a piece of printed paper, it's very easy to say whether it was published in Vienna or in Venice, because they used very different font designs. In the first volume, there are 18 chapters. The first 3 chapters deal with the buildings, population, and trade of the city in general. The rest of the chapters focus on the Armenian presence in Smyrna, the origin of Armenian migrants, I will come to that later, which is quite interesting, and their numbers and the neighborhoods in which they lived. The imposing church of St. Stephen, Surp Stepanos, gets a whole chapter devoted to it. Kosian goes on to describe the diocesan structure, schools, the community hospital, and various compatriotic and charitable associations, and their bylaws. They're actually complete texts of bylaws belonging to these associations. He also talks about printing presses, benefactors, trade and crafts. A long chapter towards the end of the first volume is devoted to the Armenian Catholic community in the city. In describing the multi-ethnic population of the city, Kosian says that Smyrna is the exact picture of the Babylonian confusion, Babylonian Kharnagutun, he calls it. All sorts of languages with different accents can be heard. Various communities use their own language. Alongside French and English expatriates, he finds the Dutch, who even then were speaking fluent English. The largest number of expatriates are the Italians, who speak a sort of language that Kosian thinks resembles Maltese, not real Italian. The small number of German and Austrian settlers have kept their language, and the most numerous are the Greeks from the Peloponnese and the Greek islands, who maintained their special dialect. The Slavs, he says, speak Serbian, and amongst the Jews, half speak Spanish and half speak Italian. There are also Turks, Persians, Kurds, and Gypsies. However, the language of commerce in the city is Greek, with all ethnic groups plying their wares in Greek with assorted accents. As to the Armenians, Kosian says that their vernacular differs greatly from that of Constantinople Armenian, but I'll say more about this later. In the early chapters, which include general information about Smyrna, Kosian relates a description of a plague epidemic that struck the city in the first half of the 19th century. The narrative is topical, now that we are at the start of the second year of the current pandemic. So I'm going to read a free translation of the passage, and for those of you who are able to read the Armenian, I have the whole section here on this slide. He says, the old people who witnessed those past unfortunate years were recounting that as soon as the first signs of the plague appeared, people set about killing all the cats in the city. They said the plague was transmitted by touch from one to another, and as cats are prone to enter every house and pass through every nook and cranny, they touch and rub against people and thus carry the germ of the disease from place to place. To avoid contact with people, many retired to their houses and cut off all communication with each other. But only someone possessing a great deal of money could afford to lead such an existence. Those who had to go to work adopted another measure. They would mount a donkey and hire a man who, brandishing a stick, made sure that no one came anywhere near the person sitting on the donkey, thus avoiding all contact with passers-by. Thanks to such precautions, the Black Death did not take its terrible toll in the city, at least not from the rich people. Now, the first mention of Armenians in Smyrna goes back to the 13th century, actually 1261, when a trade treaty concluded between the Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII and the Genoese merchants mentions Armenians as intermediaries. According to Kosian, there were two significant waves of Armenian migration to Smyrna. The first migration occurred from Cilicia after the fall of the Armenian kingdom there in 1375. A second, more important migration took place at the beginning of the 17th century, following the deportation of tens of thousands of Armenians from Eastern Armenia to Iran, instigated by the Persian Shah Abbas I. Kosian says that some among them did not stay in Persia and headed towards Asia Minor. There were around 1,000 Armenian families from Yerevan, Nakhichevan, and Artsakh, Qarabagh, who migrated to Smyrna in the 17th century. They were followed at the end of the 18th century by another 300 families from southern foothills of Mount Aragats in Armenia. In fact, two of the compatriotic associations existing in Smyrna were named after Mount Aragats and the region of Syunik in this southern part of Armenia, in eastern Armenia. These significant waves of migration from eastern regions of Armenia explains why the vernacular of Smyrna Armenians differed from West Armenian of Constantinople. Fortunately for us, Kosian has included a couple of specimens of Smyrna dialect in the second volume, phonetically written down, which have unmistakable echoes of Artsakh Gharabagh dialect. There are lots of Yegala, Katsala, Ketsala, etc. Words like that, which is very distinctly Gharabagh dialect. This East Armenian vernacular was mostly heard amongst the older generation, with younger people speaking standard West Armenian, albeit letting slip some Turkish words every now and then, Kosian complains. No doubt, Armenian schools did play a role in introducing standard West Armenian to the younger generations. Education was very important for Ottoman Armenians. Let us look at some statistics from that period. I have taken the information from the almanac of the Holy Redeemer, Surperkic, Armenian hospital in Constantinople for the year 1901, which is barely 2 years after the publication of the Kosian book. There were altogether 533 schools in the Ottoman Empire, Armenian schools in the Ottoman Empire, catering for around 61,000 pupils, with boys outnumbering girls 2-to-1. The table for Ottoman provinces shows that there were 27 schools in Smyrna, with 1,640 boys and 1,295 girls attending, altogether just under 3,000 pupils, with 55 male teachers and almost an equal number of female teachers. Being an educator himself, Kosian talks at length about the schools in Smyrna and the countryside beyond. He describes their establishment, history, administration, number of teaching staff and pupils, and the curriculum. Where possible, he includes photographs of the building. Here we have the building of the Metropolis school in Smyrna, the plan of the building, and also the first teachers or head teachers who set up the school. And the first one in this case, Ter Hovhannes Vanandetsi, Father Hovhannes of Vanand, indicates that he originated from Eastern Armenia. I will also mention here the curriculum Kosian has included for the Holy Hripsimians Girls' School, and from year 1 to year 7. We see that religious studies, Armenian, and some sort of mathematics are constant, permanent features of the program, sorry, from year 1 to year 7. Gradually, history, French, Turkish, geometry, bookkeeping, English, and science subjects appear in the curriculum. And mind you, this is a school for girls. And depending on demand, years 8 and 9 were added and included housekeeping, in addition to the subjects that were taught in year 7. And you see that the extracurricular activities for each pupil, according to each pupil's ability, included drawing, calligraphy, and sports. Kosian, despite all this, Kosian did not have a very high opinion of standard of education in Armenian schools. He laments the fact that young Armenians write fluently in English and French, but are unable to compose a simple text in their own mother tongue. There are those, he says, that call this progress and civilization and ignore the fact that the education received at community schools is very limited and superficial. We get an idea of the number of Armenians in the city through a table that Kosian has put together using European travelers' accounts, as well as Ottoman census data for later years. He concedes that the numbers for the general population and the Armenians in the city may not be accurate. And when you see these whole numbers, you agree with him. But there is no escaping the fact that as over the years the population of the city increases, the number of Armenians remains more or less constant. With pain in his heart, tzavok srti, he says this stagnation in numbers is due not only to the prevalence of mixed marriages, which he deplores, but also the diminishing number of marriages amongst Armenians themselves. He prophesies that if the prevailing trend continues, the Armenian element in Smyrna will disappear altogether within a few decades. Little did he know that just over 2 decades after the publication of his book, the Armenian element would indeed disappear from Smyrna, but for a completely different reason unforeseen by him. The Armenians lived in their own neighborhood, which stands out from adjoining districts thanks to its straight and regularly planned streets with no curving roads. The neighborhood was completely devastated after the Great Fire of 1845, after which it was rebuilt with a grid pattern with east-west and north-south streets. Amongst the new buildings erected in the reconstructed Armenian quarter was the towering Church of St. Stephen. It was one of the largest Armenian churches in the Ottoman Empire, measuring 33 meters. These are the inside measurements, 33 meters long and 21 meters wide. In the chapter devoted entirely to the description of St. Stephen's Church, Kosian also has included all the inscriptions found within the precinct of the church. In my view, one of the most important merits of Kosian's work is the wealth of Armenian inscriptions found anywhere in Smyrna, which Kosian has painstakingly copied during his years of residence in the city. These include not only inscriptions in churches and other community buildings, but also those on headstones and graves. Some of these are ancient Roman or Greek stone reliefs, which Armenians recycled by carving inscriptions on them and used them as gravestones. Most, if not all, Armenian inscriptions have now disappeared, and Kosian's book is the only comprehensive record of their erstwhile existence. The book tells us that Armenians in Smyrna are mainly merchants in direct contact with Europe, in particular with London and Manchester, where an important area of their trade is in cotton manufacturing. Sorry. Garabed Ekizian of Smyrna set up the first trade office in Manchester in 1855. And in the 17th century, the Armenians in Smyrna were already trading with Holland in the west and Persia in the east. By the middle of the 19th century, commercial links were expanded to include India, Egypt, and America. There is an air of regret in Kosian's tone when he says that Armenians are so enamored of commerce that they have neglected the crafts and the professions, with relatively few in number working as watchmakers, goldsmiths, physicians, pharmacists, and lawyers. Contact with Europe had an influence on the way Armenians dressed, men and women dressed in Smyrna. Women, Kosian tells us, follow the latest fashions from Paris, and men dress no differently from European men, except for the red fez that they wear on their head, a common headdress for Ottoman subjects. Next to Constantinople, Smyrna was another important hub of Armenian culture in the empire. From the mid-18th century to 1922, some 36 newspapers and periodicals were published in the city. The 5th century work, Refutations of the Sects, Yechts Arandots, by Yeznik of Korb, Yeznik Korbatsi, which has survived only in a single medieval manuscript, was first printed in Smyrna in 1762. Another first was the Armenian translation of Victor Hugo's Les Misérables, printed in 1868. The translator was the prominent lawyer and writer Krikor Chilingirian, who wrote to Hugo and received his autograph authorization for the translation, which you see here. Chilingirian's great nephew, who lives in London, has Hugo's letter displayed here. The letter, along with some family photographs and heirlooms, were also displayed at the exhibition on Armenian life in the Ottoman Empire, organized by the Armenian Institute at the Brunei Gallery in 2010. Translations of French romantic novels were in high demand amongst Ottoman Armenians. The publishing arms of Venice and Vienna Mekhitarist congregations, by virtue of their religious prudery, could not satisfy this demand. Therefore, many translations were mostly domestic affairs published in Constantinople and Smyrna. Smyrna was one of the only 2 cities whose Armenians were spared deportation and genocide in 1915. However, Armenian life in Smyrna came to an end when the city was occupied by the Turkish army in September 1922. A few days later, a great fire broke out in the city and burned for nearly 10 days, completely destroying the Greek and Armenian neighborhoods. Thousands of Greeks and Armenians died, and the rest were evacuated at the end of September. In a matter of days, the centuries-old Armenian heritage in that vibrant Mediterranean city vanished completely. Considering the severe destruction of Armenian heritage assets in Smyrna, really it is difficult to overestimate the value of Kosian's book. As far as I know, it is the only detailed descriptive record of the Armenian presence in and around Smyrna, and I think it now has an archival value as well as a printed value. To conclude, I should like to put on display some other books that we have in our library on Smyrna. Datevik mentioned that we had the intention of getting a display cabinet for in-person events. I don't think this display cabinet would have been big enough to display the other books that we have, but I'm taking advantage of this virtual display cabinet, which is going to be the next PowerPoint slide, to show you what else we have. And these include Smyrna 1922 by Marjorie Housepian, The Blight of Asia by George Horton, the memoir by Dr. Garabet Khacherian in Armenian and English translation, Bir Zamanlar Izmir by Osman Köker, a collection of postcards on Izmir, And finally, this our Smyrna bilingual publication, which was published by the United States Armenian Smyrna Association. Once we are able to open the library to the public, I encourage you to come and browse these and other prized possessions we have in the library. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Gagik, for a really wonderful presentation, not only of the book, of course, but also of Armenian life in Smyrna. There's just so much that I would like to ask about or comment on. And so I'm going to try and narrow it down to a couple of things. But just as I'm doing that, there'll be the opportunity for friends joining us to ask their questions either in the chat, and I will pass them on to Gagik and ask them, or if you'd like, please do make use of the raised hand function, or post in the chat, send me a message privately in the chat if you prefer, and you can ask Gagik yourself directly. So I think, well, there's so much in there that I'd really love to ask or to talk about. Those, honestly, I started welling up when I saw the image of those antique tombs that have been reused. Such a fantastic set of images. And it really speaks to a continuity of a tradition that actually goes back already to antiquity itself. Already in antiquity, you find the reuse of tombstones like that. So it's, but I've never seen any images like that. I've never seen them with Armenian script on them. So.
I think they are palimpsests in stone.
Absolutely, that's it. And you can see there where they've there's clearly some kind of trade in them. So they've filed down the older inscriptions. It's just amazing. And that's, I think, just the most visually striking aspect of a lot of fantastic information that you gave us about the languages that were spoken. I think it's great to hear of these Italians who are speaking the lingua franca, but I think not many people know, but lingua franca meant the language of the Franks, and it was essentially Arabic grammar with Latin phrasing. So it's amazing, and very similar to Maltese. But I got the sense that when he said a barbarian confusion, he didn't mean
Babylon.
Babylon.
Babylon. Okay. That's the Tower of Babel.
Tower of Babel. So I mean, even clearer then. He doesn't in quite the positive sense in which I'm sort of effusive with joy at hearing all of these languages. It seems like he had quite a clear idea of wanting to keep the uniqueness of the Armenian community within the city. Is that something that really comes across in the work?
It does. Actually, it surprised me. I really didn't know that this particular community in Smyrna and the environs also came from Eastern Armenia. Not only from Eastern Armenia, but also from Perse Armenia. The northwestern part of Iran. When he talks about these communities in the hinterland, he mentions that they came from either Salmast or Khoy or Tabriz to those little localities. They didn't go to the main city, but they stayed in these little places not far from Smyrna, and of course they kept their dialect. I think in these isolated places, dialects are very easily kept. For example, in the present-day Republic of Armenia, there are villages settled by Armenians who migrated from Iran in 1828, so nearly 200 years ago, and they still have kept the original dialect. Although the children go to school and learn the standard East Armenian, but at home, they speak this different language. So dialects can survive for a long time, and they did survive in Smyrna. We have a picture of everyone in the Ottoman Empire speaking West Armenian.
Yeah.
But this was, there are gray areas as well. This wasn't true in the case of Smyrna, which was the second metropolis, really, after Constantinople.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the most striking things. And particularly that he records, and like you said, this gives it archival value, that he records the actual words themselves. So it's possible to see this in Sea Karabakh dialect today.
Yes, yes. He actually has put, there are two stories told by old people to him, and he has phonetically taken these down. So it's possible to, when I read that aloud, it's possible to hear the Qarabağ intonation, actually. Interesting.
So we have a couple of questions coming into the Zoom chat. Anna Vartanyan asks whether there's any information about those Armenians that were saved from Smyrna by a Japanese ship, Tokei Maru, I think is the name.
Well, of course, it won't be in this book because it was published in 1899. He had no idea. He knew, of course, afterwards what happened in Smyrna, but this book came out in 1899, and in the book there is nothing, of course, about there's a talk of the Great Fire of 1845, but that's it.
Yeah.
I don't know. There were some ships which picked up refugees from the quay in Smyrna, and there are some harrowing photographs of these quays crowded by people waiting to be evacuated. But no, I don't know much about these the involvement of the Japanese ship.
Yes, well,
something that possibly in Marjorie Housepian's book there will be a mention of that.
Okay, very interesting.
Smyrna 1922. I think it's a very good account of what happened within a few days, really.
Yes, it's a very short period, and those images.
Short period. I think the army entered Smyrna on the 9th of September, and the fire started on the 13th. So within 4 days, yeah.
And those images of Smyrna are particularly impressed in the Greek imaginary of what happened in the end of the Ottoman Empire. But Anna has said that she's actually published an article herself on this topic, and we'll share it with you, and you'll be able to read about the Japanese.
Thank you. I'd be grateful. Thank you very much.
Another friend joining, Ceyla Akgerman, has asked, I guess not, but whether it's possible to find this book in English. Has it been translated? Has there been work done on it?
As far as I know, no. It hasn't been translated. It would be a very good candidate for translation, because as I said, it does now have an archival value. It's not just a descriptive of life in Smyrna, but he has put down, well, the bylaws we may be able to find in archives somewhere, but not the inscriptions which have gone forever. We won't see those inscriptions anymore. He has included the plans of every church.
Wow.
Yes, in Smyrna and also in the outlying areas. Plans of the Armenian hospital. I mean, all these things have gone, so we can have an idea of how a hospital functioned, for example. What was each room for? Because he does mention that as well. So it's an excellent repository, really, of information, irretrievable information now.
Yes, that's really fair and perfect for researchers to really paint a very vivid image of the life that there was.
Almost, it has become a primary material for research.
Absolutely. And Ceyla also asks whether there are books or either information in this book or in other books on the cultural influence of the French and English schools that were set up and their impact on the community.
Not directly. He doesn't talk about schools set up by Europeans in Smyrna. But as I mentioned, he does deplore the fact that young Armenians are more likely to be fluent in French and English than in Armenian. And he doesn't even talk about much about their own school, because the Vienna Mechitarists had a school in Smyrna. He talks mostly about the earlier established schools, the schools that were founded at the beginning of the 19th century and were very famous, like Mestropian and Repsimians. Much more about these schools, their curriculum, which is also very interesting, what these children were taught, but doesn't talk much about other schools, because his concentration is on Armenians in Smyrna.
Yes. And on the specifically Armenian life there, he seems very, he's worried about intermarriage.
Yes.
He wants them to have more children. He wants yes, it's a city that seems to resist in its reality what he'd really like from the Armenian Smyrnans.
Yeah, he wants them to get married early in life, not late.
So I mentioned the book seems perfect for a researcher. We have a PhD researcher with us, Yasin Özdemir, who said that the Ottoman population records are also available for the period 1831 to 1845 for the Izmir Armenians. And Yasin's currently studying the internal migration towards Izmir as a PhD thesis. So she's reading these notebooks, and she wanted to point out, Yasin wanted to point out that the Armenians of Izmir apparently live in two neighborhoods, and that Iranian and Catholic Armenians were recorded differently from the Apostolic Armenians in the population register. And Yasin's writing an article about this, which can also be shared. So you've got two articles. But was wondering whether you can suggest a study on this subject, or if there's mention of this separation, internal separation within the Armenian community there.
He does in the chapter at the end of volume 1, which he devotes entirely to the Catholic Armenian community in Smyrna. He does talk about their numbers, and I couldn't find out whether he had included these people in the general population numbers for Armenians. But looking at the number of households he mentions, I don't think there were more than a few hundred Catholic Armenians in Smyrna. I cannot remember if he has given an exact number or not, but he does mention the Ottoman census for the later years. But he also, there's a proviso as a footnote in which he says it's difficult to know what these numbers indicate, because I think there was a head fee, or galchahark he calls it, head money, for young men of conscription age that they had to pay in order not to do military service, perhaps. And he doesn't know who was counted as such and who wasn't. So it will be interesting to find out what the exact figures were. I mean, if there are Ottoman census figures, which I'm sure will be more detailed than what Kosian gives us in his book, that will be interesting to compare. Yes.
Yasin, would you like to, is there more that you would like to say on this? You can speak directly if you'd like, rather than, no? Okay. We have another question then from Richard Anushian, who first congratulates you, and there's lots of those comments. Richard, why would you like to ask the question directly?
It's actually not my question.
It was actually my question. So I thought you would have guessed that. Gagik, it was an excellent, it was wonderful. Thank you so much. The presentation was amazing and learned so much. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, I'm particularly interested in the Tatigyan brothers, Boros and Bedros, who were among the Armenian printers and publishers in the city of Smyrna from the 1840s until around 1900, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And there were also incredible engravers and artists So, I mean, they basically publish books in Armenian, but also in French and in Greek, etc. So there were major players in the city. I was wondering whether there was any mention of the Tatigian brothers in the book at all.
I didn't come across them, no. And he does mention the printing presses, but doesn't dwell on them. So it wasn't part of his area of interest for some reason. And I was able to find out the number of, for example, periodicals printed in Smyrna from other sources, not from his, because he just passes over the one or two titles, and that's it.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Thank you.
We have a related question to that, actually. Alexandra Sarkis, again, thanks for an excellent talk, and asks whether you spoke a lot about how the Armenian cultural life as such was presented in the book, the schools for Armenians, Armenian arts in particular. Does it say much about the contribution of Armenians to the broader cultural life in the metropolis? As you said, it's a large city. Does it say much about their involvement with the other communities in cultural life?
Well, no, except that he does say that most Armenians speak almost all the languages which are spoken in the city, and therefore they talk to their Turkish, Jewish, Greek neighbors, but he doesn't talk about interethnic relations very much. As I said, his main focus is Armenians in Smyrna. For example, he in one place he does mention about that the existence of a theater, but doesn't talk much about it. That would have been interesting, I think, and I didn't have time to do further research to find more about this theater in Smyrna, but didn't have enough time to pursue the research. But I'm sure there must have been a lot of interaction between various communities, no doubt. But you realize in these cities where you had neighborhoods populated by Armenians, neighborhoods populated by Greeks, I don't know how much day-to-day interaction they could have had. They could have had interactions in business, in commerce, but difficult to say. It's sort of anthropological social study that we should look at for.
Yeah, I mean, contemporary Jerusalem would suggest that there's the potential for both, for people being part of a day-to-day life if they play certain social roles, and also being more or less isolated from the other communities.
Yeah, well, for example, from personal experience, I can say that in the city where I was born in northwestern Iran, in Tabriz, there were two very distinct Armenian quarters, almost entirely inhabited by Armenians, and there was very little interaction between Armenian families and non-Armenian families, but there was interaction when doing shopping, or men working in the same place with other ethnic people. So it's possible that there wasn't a very great deal of interaction, but just to a certain degree.
Yes. And Rupen Berberian asks, I guess the answer to this, given one of your previous questions, would be a yes. But does he discuss the still standing Menemen Surp-Sarkis Armenian church just outside of Smyrna?
Which locality? Because he mentions something like 7 or 8 different localities outside Smyrna, and all had their own churches and their own primary schools, but I can't remember which locality had which church in it. If he remember, I can look it up, of course, in the book and find out, but I can't remember St. Sarkis. It's strange that he doesn't apart from this huge church that they had in the center of Smyrna, Sub Stepanos, he doesn't talk much about other churches in the city. There are one or two chapels, but that's it. Whereas the outlying areas outside, like Aydın, etc., they have their own churches, all of them, and strangely, almost built to the same plan, which very much looks like the floor plans of Greek churches that I've seen when I was doing research for this book. The Greek churches had more or less the same floor plan as the Armenian churches.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and does speak to more interaction.
Yeah.
To lots of interaction, sharing of architects, which again is something that goes back for a very long time.
But you see, when you look at the architecture of Sub Stepanos, St. Stephen, it's very European.
Yeah.
It's a European church. Even the inside, when you look at the columns, I didn't put a picture of the interior, but it looks like a European church. They didn't mind that. Whereas nowadays, of course, we build churches according to the Armenian architectural style, and no deviation is tolerated.
Yeah, and the same on the Greek side. In fact, the churches are late Paleologan, sort of 13th, 14th century Byzantine churches. So Tato, maybe you'd like to ask this question yourself, Tato.
Oh, let me unmute myself. Gagik, I was fascinated. Well, thank you first. Amazing presentation as always. You learn history, art, archaeology, literature, a mini degree there. I was fascinated by the font you showed, the special Mekhitarist font. It was
Vienna Mekhitarist font.
Oh, it's not just any Mekhitarist.
No, it's a Vienna Mekhitarist font, which is very easily distinguishable to a trained eye or a half-trained eye. You can easily tell that this, if I give you a piece of paper, you should be able to say, oh, this is published in Vienna, not in Venice or in Paris or in Istanbul. They had a very modern-looking font designer. I don't know who this person was, but
incredible.
Very legible, easy to read.
Was it just a branding exercise, basically? It was a clever marketing move to have their own brand.
I think most printing presses, Armenian printing presses, had their own casts for fonts. Someone I know, Elena Papasisa, who was a student at Reading University, working on Armenian fonts from the very beginning, from 1512 onwards. She's the expert on this, but it's true that like paleography, that sometimes you're able to identify the age of a manuscript by looking at the way the scribe wrote the text. Printing presses, especially Armenian printing presses, distinguish themselves with the font that they used. So it's very easy to identify a printed page from Isfahan, New Julfa, or from a printing press in Constantinople. Sometimes they had to do their own fonts, you see, using local craftsmen.
Incredible. Thank you, Gagik. And here is a new idea for another event. If we ask our program manager to program something about all the fonts, I'm sure people would love to see it. And I'm sure our colleague Anushka, who loves her fonts, is our graphic designer, will get excited about it. And while I'm unmuted, Gagik, I have to say my favorite part was about their social distancing measures.
Exactly.
Everyone get your own donkey and kill the cat. So
brandishing the stick, and I thought it was so topical.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why we are having this event, actually.
And the rich managing to avoid the worst of it. Plus ça change, plus la même chose.
Yeah, plus ça change.
No, it's fascinating. So we're winding down, and there aren't too many questions. So I guess I had a couple more that I wanted to come back to. So one, I'm not sure if I missed it, but does he say specifically why he'd chosen Smyrna? Because if I remember correctly, you said he's from Erzurum, so the very other end of the empire, and he wrote a work about Erzurum, got in. But does he indicate why Smyrna was this special interest?
Because he lived there for many years. He was, I think he was 12 or 13 years old. He was sent from Erzurum first to Constantinople and then on to Vienna. I think he studied for a couple of years in a Mekhitarist college in Constantinople, and then sent to the Vienna monastery as a seminarian. Then he was ordained and was sent back to the Ottoman Empire and served in Smyrna for many years. I'm just thinking possibly at least 15 years, if not more, because he was still in Smyrna when the book came out. He didn't leave afterwards. He was there until 1910. He was then sent to Erzurum, and for some reason, perhaps because he was an Austrian subject or a Catholic priest, he escaped deportation and made his way back to Constantinople in 1916 or 17. So, but he took advantage of his stay in this major metropolis in the Ottoman Empire and the very prosperous community living there to write something, and he got Mr. Yusufian to pay for the printing of the work. So it was an astute move and good for us.
Certainly a good use of time. So if there aren't further questions, I've got one sort of summing up one, which comes from, is connected to what you were just saying, that Smyrna was this grand metropolis of the empire, really in many ways a second city after Constantinople. And in retrospect, after Smyrna was lost and utterly destroyed to most of the communities that had been living there, there's a sort of shift in emphasis to Smyrna as a really ancient city, and of course it has been populated for a long time, as you said, back into the pre-classical world. But my sense has always been that the Smyrna that was lost was a Smyrna that was really firmly of its time and place, a Smyrna of early modernity, created by the merchant capitalism that was taking off from in those centuries. A lot of the communities that lived there at that point were moved in this period, in the 16th to 19th centuries, rather than having been there for so much longer. And that goes for a large portion of the Greek population. And my sense is that that's the Smyrna that's communicated in this book too. Not a sort of eternal Smyrna, but this very lively, very vibrant place of its time.
It's as if he has opened a window for a particular period for us to look into, and then he closed it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So are there any final things, any little tidbits, any final things that you wanted to share with us?
Well, I just want to say that I enjoyed doing this. I learned a lot about Smyrna, and not only the Armenian community, but also about the city. And the more I do things like that, the more enamored of our library I become. So we really have gems in the library, and I hope that in the future events I will be able to present more of these prized possessions that we have in the library. You should come and visit, all of you, when we are open to the public.
Yes, absolutely, when possible. And maybe this is one of the things that we can think about for a digitization or something like that. But yes, well, thank you so much, Gagik.
Thank you.
There's more. Thanks coming in. And I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that it was lovely as ever. Yes, everyone clapping for you. So
thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And please, friends, do all look out for the next installment in coming months. But just before I let you go, say about the events for the rest of April, as I say, all commemorating the Armenian and related genocides. So coming up on Thursday, the 15th of April at 7:30 p.m. again, UK time, we have the next in the AI book club, and we're very lucky to be joined by the author of this book, recently released in the UK, although it was available as an ebook previously, The Gimmicks, with Chris McCormick. And The Gimmicks is set in the waning years of the Cold War and tracks a trio of young Armenians moving across the globe as their lives are impacted by the long-term effects of the genocide. So a really fascinating new book. There should be a review on our website shortly, and we hope to see you there. Then on the 22nd of April, Thursday the 22nd of April, at 6:30 p.m. UK time, so to give more time for friends joining from Yerevan. In the lead up to April 24th, of course, we have our event, The Righteous Among Our Neighbours, Non-Armenians and Armenian Survival from 1915 to today. So that really looks at the role played by non-Armenians in supporting, protecting and asserting the rights of Armenians in their ancestral homelands from the genocide to now. And we'll be joined by a really fantastic group of people, including Osman Baydemir, who's the former MP of Diyarbakir, Garanakert, and was in charge of the reconstruction of the Surp Gerakos church there. We'll also have music and poetry performances from Armenian and Assyrian friends. We'll also be joined by friends from the Genocide Museum in Armenia. So please do join us for that. And finally, in the week following April 24th, on Thursday, the 29th of April at 7:30, again, UK time, we have an event focused on the Yazidi genocide and the Yazidi community. Of course, this genocide came almost exactly a century after the Armenian genocide and had many resonances, particularly the gendered violence. So we'll be joined by representatives from the Yazidi community, both in Armenia itself and in Shengal or Sinjar in the north of Iraq. So we think that would be a really great event. So please do join us for all of those. Please do also check out our podcast program, which has several episodes focused on survival, regeneration, and the genocide this month. And just finally, before I hand you over to Director Tatvik Ayvazyan, there is a feedback form that I'm about to put into the chat. Please do leave your feedback, positive and negative. We really want to learn from each of our events and to keep on providing events that people find useful and educational. So please do answer there. But thank you again to Gagik. Thank you, everyone. And I'll pass over to Tato.
Thank you again, Nick. What negative feedback can possibly be about Gagik's talk? Only if it was too short. We want longer. We want more books. We want it every week. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it as much as we did. And thanks again, Gagik. I wanted to add one thing. However magical our library and our librarian are, they don't fund by themselves. That's the only thing they can do. They don't generate money. So we have a library fundraiser running at the moment, which will allow us to purchase a new cataloging software, which means people visiting our library can search, can order books, can understand what similar books there are, will be a huge help for the community and the researchers. And I think Nick is about to share a link in the chat line to the library fundraiser if you'd like to support us. Also, we have a special offer this week. If you support the library until Tuesday, Wednesday, Gagik, when we are getting the copies of our new magazine, sometime this week. So if you become a member of a friend of Armenian Institute, you will get a beautiful, fresh first copy of Zanazan magazine in the post, a physical copy, something to hold, a rarity in our digital times. So please visit our library fundraiser page, support us, and we hopefully will see you in the library. Nick mentioned all our fantastic events coming up in April. We have something really joyful as well in April. We are starting a children's storytelling session on Saturday morning run by Virgin Gulbenkian, which will run her retellings of Satsunsi David. So if you know any kids between 7 and 11, or you want to borrow a kit from a friend and join us, it's only £10 a session. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your evening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.